Welcome. You're listening to Making Life Brighter Radio, and I'm your host, Winifred Adams. And today we have a very special guest, and we have a tremendous deep dive into time, space, and the quantum. And I really, really am excited to share this guest with you, who is going to be known the world over for his discoveries. And there may be discoveries that some portions of our world don't want out there. But in fact, he has pressed on, and no matter the muting of him, no matter how much people have actually tried to thwart his efforts, he presses on, and I am so, so, so grateful he's come to speak with us today. Please welcome ASHTON Forbes. Here he is.
Wow.
Welcome, ASHTON. Thank you.
Winifred, thank you very much for having me on. That's one of the best introductions anybody's ever given me. I don't think that highly of myself, but I do think that the science and the physics and the stuff that we've been talking about is civilization changing regarding energy, where it comes from, and what it means for where our civilization is headed in the future. So thank you very
Oh,
much and looking forward to talking to you.
absolutely. Your research is so groundbreaking, and it really sets the tone for the future and the generations that will follow, because what you're talking about is light years ahead, even though it's kind of seemingly existent. And what you've just discovered and figured out that's all around us is so cool. So we're just going to go down through this because we're going to talk quantum and we're going to go quick. I
Let's do it.
really, really am excited about. Let's jump in. First of all, we're talking about the disappearance of Flight 370, right? The Malaysian flight. And Ashton, you can find him all over the internet, by the way, on Twitter and on YouTube. And I encourage you to follow and tell everybody you know, because they're trying to mute him. And we're just not going to allow that here. We believe in free speech and quantum and a better world. So making our lives brighter, of course. Flight 370 disappeared out of the sky, but he has a different take on that. So let's start with EVOs. I want to jump in, and some of this audience knows these things and some doesn't, but we're going to define it as we go, okay?
I like it. It's just yeah, here's ask about MH370, jump right into the EVOs. Funny part is a lot of the time when I talk to people, I try to ease them into like, yeah, there's these balls of plasma that can be remote controlled around. When trying to talk about this investigation, I think it's important to remember that all this does though go back to this missing airliner and these videos out there that have been out there for 10 years that are clearly US military videos of the plane. And they show us a branch of physics and science that I'm 1,000% convinced has been suppressed from the world. So it's a horrible tragedy what happened to those people. And I don't know if the world's really ready to accept what has been done to the families of those passengers who are now just gone. But the good that can come from it now is that we can show that there is negative energy is possible. 0 point energy is all around us. We're not in an empty vacuum of space. Like there's this energy everywhere. Like we're sitting in the bathtub. Maybe there's like, we don't know the level that we're sitting in. That's like the big controversy, but we're sitting in this bathtub of energy. And
Can I interrupt you there?
jump, please do.
What's to say that there's any level? What if it's just immersive completely and you're just in it and all you're doing is beginning to measure the space around you? And in this case, we're even going to jump into time, but the space around you, why does it have to be like glass half full?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And if you look at the physics and the equations, it gets kind of fun. They start normalizing things because I think they at one point came to a solution that said there was an infinite amount of energy. It's maybe just a matter of perspective, but how deep is that? How full is that glass of energy? It's called something called the vacuum catastrophe, which is this idea that when we look out, we see this small amount of energy. It looks like an empty void, but there's this Dirac sea of negative energy potential, dark energy, we are calling it now, potentially even more so a contribution to our universe than what conventional physics would say, which is like, I think 70% of this energy and matter in outer space is dark energy. It might even be more than that. Yeah, we don't
Mm,
actually know. The quantum mechanics says that the amount of energy is like over 100 orders of magnitude higher than what general relativity, just us looking out there at the cosmological constant, tells us. So this is a big shift in our perspective of the universe, is that if the universe isn't empty, then it's a medium, then we're in a fish inside of a fishbowl. But it answers a lot of big questions. Like when we look at atoms, it's mostly empty space around them at the smallest scales, mostly just empty space. What's between that? And what's between us and the next planet or the next solar system? Is it really just nothing? Well, if it is nothing, then why, when we look at galaxies, does it look like some stars on the edges are spinning faster than what they should be spinning if I were to just spin, some matter around me here on Earth? And the answer is because we're not empty space there. It's this medium that's helped pushing things along. That's why it looks, when something spins around, it's looking more homogeneous when we look at these galaxies of stars spinning around them. So this energy can change everything. So going back to your question about EVOs, to tie it back to that and to the plane, there is this self-organizing property of plasma that was discovered by probably many people, but I'll attribute it to Ken Shoulders, and he called them exotic vacuum objects. And why he called them that is because he believed this excess energy they were producing, potentially mostly in the form of heat, but some in the form of possible electricity as well, was extracting energy from the vacuum. So he's basically implying that they were producing coefficient of performance greater than 1. Free energy, free excess energy. So where's that coming from? It must be coming from the vacuum. And this balls of plasma is the fourth state of matter, and it has these natural properties where it creates an asymmetry. Electrons begin to clump together, and that leaves behind positrons of opposite charge. So now you've got negative and positive charge, and whenever this happens, we see electricity get formed, energy gets formed due to this asymmetry, just like a battery, just like a capacitor. And then it turns out these plasmas just will naturally form like spherical shapes or toroidal shapes as well. But if they're able to,
are they
go ahead.
usually toroidal shapes, or have you found them to be other shapes?
The only two shapes I found, toroidal shapes have been the key to a lot of electromagnetism. And in plasmas as well. You can actually see in YouTube these videos where people take like a magnetic confinement jar in glass, and they have some gas in there, and then they just actually rub some electric charge against it. It can be your hand or whatever, a wand, and then you'll see these plasmas begin to form. And then once they become a toroid, which is a donut shape, it just stabilizes, and it'll just stay like that.
Can you have more than one in one field like that?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I think that Bob Grenier would say you can have fractal toroids, and a lot of this does go back to nature. I'm not a big trying to connect everything together, but what you see in these fractal toroids, if you look at smoke rings, there's some really good videos out there that show dispersion of smoke rings, is that they form this toroid when you blow a smoke ring. And then it dissipates out and it forms like a bunch of smaller toroidal rings going out the opposite perpendicular direction. But they also then form their own little smoke rings. And then this continues, and that goes on and on and on. This is what we would call this fractal nature of a toroid. And toroid's not just a woo-woo thing. It's important because it directs the electromagnetic forces. Everything in electricity and energy is based on the right-hand rule in physics, which we have is something called the Poynting vector, which is going to determine your vector of power transfer or direction. And it's based on electric and magnetic fields. And so those electromagnetic fields are determining where this vector of this energy pull is going to be. I would argue that it's determining how the energy is being basically pulled out of this sea of energy all around us. And the electromagnetism is the key in that the whole universe, then, if you look at it like a big or let's say a super fluid medium It has various charge densities everywhere you go. That is how we, if we look at the universe like that, then it's going to explain everything that we see observationally around us. And then the question is, well, how can we manipulate this, you know?
Do you manipulate it, or are you just observing it? Because it appears that the disappearance of the airplane, you're arguing, was a manipulation of the subspace or the actual space, the plasma field around it. Was the plasma field directed to it, or was the plasma field already there and it pulled in and then they, like, who directs that? Where's the initiation of that event?
Yeah, and for the people that maybe are just trying to catch up, I guess I am let's say a leading researcher into the missing Malaysian flight MH370, disappeared 10 years ago. I've done a lot of interviews about it, so a lot of people on social media may know who I am, but people probably don't know me if they only watch TV and things like that. But in these videos, and I'll just go ahead and pull one of these up right now because I think this is a good point to share.
Great, yeah.
Let me pull up this one. I'm gonna pull up this drone video here. Um, so in this video, we can see this Predator drone, right? And this is thermal video. It's at nighttime as well. This is actually why they use thermal for some reasons. And in other cases, they use it just because they want to see what we're about to see here, which is these orbs coming around the plane. And we were able to confirm this is a Boeing 777. It's a perfect overlay to MH370. The coordinates in the other video are actually the Nicobar Islands, where this plane actually, some would argue that's where it really disappeared, close to the track of the real location of the plane. So we see these orbs, but they're doing this dance around the plane, and we're actually looking at balls of plasma at low temperatures here, like not the temperatures of the sun. Otherwise, it'd be hotter than the engines that we see there. But since it is colder, I'm going to pause it here for a second. Like, look at this heat signature of this orb here. This here just, if this is real, this has to be cohering energy from the vacuum, or the environment, I want to say, not the vacuum, from the environment. And the reason why I'm differentiating that is because the air and water, has a density of molecules. It may not seem dense when we're walking through it, but that's also a medium. So these things could actually be pulling, like, for example, hydrogen out of the atmosphere and out of the water if necessary, and using it to produce fusion, like actively. And if anyone thinks these videos are fake, like, look at the crazy amount of detail that you're seeing frame by frame here, especially of this heat signature in the belly of the plane and the smoke coming
Yeah.
off of this here. Like, this is crazy. That's not a contrail. That's smoke coming from the center of the plane. And we found out that the heat exhaust ports are right here, the AC heat exhaust ports. Now, that's not saying that's necessarily what this is we're looking at here. There could be a fire near the landing gear, but this is exactly where the landing gear is at. And frame by frame, if I just pause it, every frame is different. Like, did someone manually edit all of these frames of this to make this happen? Like, no, there's nothing that could even recreate this.
So with the assumption that it is authentic, this is real, going back to the plasma, um, where does it initiate? We saw one, as if you
Yeah.
started that, we saw one, like, at the distance, and then the other two appeared. And maybe they'd already been there. Maybe they're always there. We just didn't see it right away. Or did they come into form?
So this is the part where you kind of have to infer based on, well, let me show the second video before I do that. But to really infer what we're looking at and what the motive is, you have to really dig into the details around the videos, and then also the details around the missing plane. Like, why is there a cover up with this plane? Like, regardless of if anyone believes these videos are real or not, there's clearly a cover up happening with this plane. The fact that, like, we know what happened to this plane, but we're just lying about it. Like, the United States government knows what happened to this plane. We're looking at a satellite video of the plane from the United States government. And I know it is because in the bottom left, it says NROL 22. National Reconnaissance Office Launch 22, shot in outer space 2006, first launch of the Cyber system, space-based infrared satellite constellation. So I'm like, this is obviously that.
Right.
I don't know how anyone would make that up. Like, that's pretty specific. And those are real clouds we're looking at here. There's no contention on that point. The clouds actually evolve. They say, well, why don't they move? Well, like, you're only looking at for like a few seconds. The reason why I actually wanted to show this video, though, I want to let's watch it zap here away. It's crazy. And they
That
are
is.
both in sync. I like even recently looked at them side by side, and like there's no doubt they're in sync. Two completely different perspectives. Like the drone is just off field. The first orb, when it gets into orientation, you can actually see it in the drone video doing this weird spin it does, like before it locks in.
Mm-hmm.
uh Arachnus, I think his name was basically saying this is like a vectoring system.
Okay, yeah.
Like even to program that to hoax it is probably more effort than the whole video. Just
We'll
to
see how it comes into sync after a minute. First there's one,
yes,
then there's
yes.
two, and it creates like a spin, like a toroidal field type beginning spin, like a rotation, and then all of a sudden it has to be moving in some way to keep them exactly evenly spaced. It
Oh
looks
yeah.
like they're in sync, right?
And this is the part that led me to UFOlogy, because you look at that and you go, okay, I'm looking at UFOs. Um, And my first instinct is, well, it's the US government because they're filming it with two videos. There's a cover up 10 years later, still going on with this plane. Every FOIA, and I've added another, let's say 20 to the pile, all being rejected from for interest of national defense, like not
Right.
like specific reasons. Like,
Of
and the
course.
other one is covert operations. I'm like, guys, they're literally rejecting my FOIA requests like into random fire extinguishers and stuff like that. That's all like evidence related to the plane. And I'm not even in those cases like mentioning MH370, and they're still like, nope, sorry, we can't, CIA can't tell you anything about a fire suppression bottle that washed up in the Maldives. That's a Boeing 777 fire suppression bottle. I'm like, okay, guys, come on, man. Like, obviously we know something, right? So, um, then the question though is, okay, well, can it be, can it be non-human intelligence? Can that be a craft? What's going on? And the heat signatures from the first video, or what was the giveaway in terms of this is cold fusion that we're seeing here. And it took me, this isn't something I just figured out overnight. It took like many months of going down this path and realizing that the cover up of this plane is related to free energy. We call it free energy. It's a bit of a misnomer, but the idea that we can pull this energy that's all around us, like we can just pull it up and just pump it basically out of the ether, out of the vacuum all around us. And I should have known right away because Bob Greenier, low energy nuclear reaction physicist, I'll call it a relatively famous clip that I made of him basically saying, like, I didn't go back in time and make these videos. And to have any idea how to fake this would be unthinkable for somebody out there. Because he's like, I'm like the leading researcher in the world that's still going at cold fusion and testing people's actual devices and claims. And only like in the year after plane disappeared, the Alto University paper on magnetic monopoles drops. And this is important because there's something called the Schwinger effect that claims that we can potentially produce a magnetic monopole with powerful electromagnetic fields. And that might be what's happening with these plasmas. And it might be also why it's not just able to form a toroidal structure, but actual spherical structure. Why? Because there would be a magnetic monopole at the center, which is the magnetic field. And a magnetic monopole, instead of having a bar magnetic field, the magnetic field just goes inward or just goes outward. So you imagine your field's just going outward. Well, then all the electrons or whatever within a certain sphere range of that magnetic field are going to be on the inside. There's going to be a barrier, very similar to the idea of a black hole, where there's just like actual permittivity change in space-time. That's what's actually happening. What that means is that you're changing the refractive index of the medium. You're changing the speed of light of the medium. And now
From the
this,
inner to the outer of that.
sorry, repeat that, please.
Excuse me, from the center of that to the outer portion of that.
Yeah, and that's what we see with the orbs. Like that's why I'll show one more clip because now people are like, wait, what is he talking about?
But let me ask you this. Is
Mhm.
the plane the monopole for those plasma,
So,
or is it within each plasma that you're
so
talking about?
what Bob Greenyer explained is that there's probably a toroidal structure inside of these orbs here. And when they're actually forming a larger toroidal, let's say, I'm not going to say imaginary because it's a real structure, but they're creating a ring between them as well. And that's why there's three of them, because they're creating a ring and the center is the plane. If you dig into wormhole physics, what you find is that you need to create something called a Casimir shell, which is a repulsive and attractive force that equalize out in a very specific way that basically creates a bubble in space-time. And so,
Yeah, look at that.
yeah, so Bob Greenyer explained that he even said, like, when these things converge, that's the giveaway that this is real. Because if you watch closely here, I'm going to go frame by frame. You can see now, you can see the heat signature very well from the orb right here. You can see it well
Mhm.
here as well. Still see it well. All of a sudden it starts to blur right here. Notice them blurred?
Yeah, yeah, I can see that.
They're
And they're shifting.
reorienting.
Yes, right.
They're reorienting right here, and then they pop out of it, and they're ready, and then they immediately converge on the plane once they pop out. Nobody faked that.
No.
Nobody faked that. This is like beyond like anything anyone's ever seen in a movie. Like this is way too detailed because that convergence is extremely specific in physics. This is a Coulomb force. This is the same thing as if you jam two magnets of the same polarity into each other. What do? They repel each other violently, right? And these are very powerful monopoles that are being produced here as well. So you've got these powerful electromagnetic fields strong enough that they're ripping through space-time, quite literally, producing a permittivity change. This heat signature is equivalent to the pulling the drain out of your tub and the water goes down and creates a vortex or a tornado. Why do we always see these vortex formations? Well, in this case, because it's interacting with the medium, the ocean of energy that we see around us, the drain. That's why you're seeing that. It's really like they call it the Ukanavasara, depending on which you believe in, like symbolism and stuff like that. But the Tesla symbol, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
So they're converging and they're reaching a point where the electromagnetic force of them being jammed together breaks the Schwinger limit here. It gets so powerful that it breaks the Schwinger limit, the energy levels do, and this causes space-time to go nonlinear. And this is at the large scale. I would argue this is what they did here was something called the dynamic Casimir effect, which is that they're able to pull photons straight out of the ether, just pull energy straight out of the ether with the dynamic Casimir effect. And the reason why this is black right here, 4 frames, full wormhole. I'm gonna show it's small here. It gets really big the next frame. It shrinks in the 3rd frame, and then it's gone in the 4th frame. So
It's
3
almost
frames.
like it
So
ate
this
it.
happens
It
in
just
like,
opened up and absorbed it and then took it out, huh?
yeah, and this is negative energy. This is not white hot. This is a thermal video.
Yeah, and this is cold. Let's
This
go
is
back and define
cold.
a few things for people that haven't been listening to you maybe in terms of your shows previously or aren't
Yeah.
familiar with this. So you really been talking about cold fusion. You've been
Yeah.
talking about how cold is and what that means. So how does that factor into what we're seeing in that moment that it actually expands and contracts there? What does that do to the amount of what looks like heat, but it's not really heat, is what you're saying?
Well, if you just think of a point in space as having a level of a temperature to it, and the lower the temperature, the less energy there is. Then if you get to 0, you would say there's no more energy there. That's what our conventional physics looks at. Now, the problem is quantum mechanics came in and said, even when you're down here at 0, no, there's still energy going on. There's still energy going on. And we know that, so even if you take a pendulum and it spins back and forth, even when it's like this and quantum mechanical level, things are always moving. So there's always energy. So what's the answer then? How is that possible?
Yeah.
And we know this is true because we've seen experimental proof. Casimir effect is one, Lamb shift is another. The fact that a hydrogen atom at rest doesn't radiate energy, the fact that we have superfluids like helium-3 doesn't freeze at absolute zero. If it's not frozen, then that means the molecules are still moving. So according to our conventional physics, so again, there must be an answer here. There must be more energy below this. And so I would say this is the surface of the ocean, zero. That's the surface of the ocean. That's our equilibrium. Now, if I'm in a bathtub and the bathtub's at 98 degrees or whatever body temperature, if the bathtub's same as my body temperature, I'm going to say there's nothing there. I don't feel anything. There's no energy there. But you're going to go, wait, that's just because you're in a bathtub that's at 98 degrees. We can still go 98 degrees down further to get to zero. You just were in an equilibrium and you thought that was zero. That's what's going on with our conventional understanding of physics. Extremely confident in making this claim. And that if we go below that, into that sea level, that's negative energy. So now all of a sudden we need to ask the question, where's energy even coming from? Where's the energy coming from for this right here? Is this getting beamed at the speed of light through the wire from the power plant? It's not what's happening. That's not what's happening at all. There's just a local asymmetry being created there that is allowing those lights to basically pull energy right out of the ether from their local location there. And the movement of the electrons is what's enabling that circuit to allow that to happen. What generates power? Believe it or not, Tesla is the person that invented alternating current over 100 years ago, figured it out. He also believed in radiant energy, which was later then called the ether, which was now called zero-point energy, the same stuff we're talking about right now. People should have listened to Tesla because we still use that alternating current still today, almost 125 years later. We're still using his discovery. It's a discovery. And he discovered if you spin a copper coil through a magnetic field, it generates current, electrical energy that we can use. That's it. That's simple. When all forms of power, functionally, basically all forms of power, just this is all they do. At least all conventional forms of fossil fuel burning. We're either using wind to spin a turbine. Again, this is just us spinning the turbine, or steam in the case of burning things, or even nuclear power. People think that is electricity just coming out of the plutonium? No, we use it to heat up water and then the steam spins a turbine. Again, this is all we're doing. Why we should be thinking about how do we interact with the energy in other ways? Like we should say, oh, AC generator, this was one way. Now, what are other ways that we can do it? One of those ways is cold fusion, plasma. And for people who want to second guess me, this is what I'll say, is that in order to produce plasma, we have to pull the electrons out of an atom. How do you do that? You add energy to it. How do you do that? You use a laser. Simple as that. So we use a laser.
I was gonna say, like, kind of freezing cancer cells or freezing something where they're going in and they're actually like they're creating a deadening of it, but they're actually moving the energy around it. They're shifting it out.
And to be specific, if you add energy to it, then the electrons in the far orbitals from the atom can break free. And if this happens, then you're left behind a positively charged ion. And so then these electrons, when Ken Shoulders did his research into EVOs, he found that these plasmas are naturally doing this. So you're ripping the electrons away. This plasma is being formed in this process. And then the asymmetry of you ripping the electron away from the hydrogen atom or whatever you want it to be, this is causing an asymmetry now as well, naturally. What he said is that these things were startlingly easy to produce. Startlingly easy. It wasn't a complex process. Is that once you understand this idea of like, well, we're just going to stimulate the hydrogen atom. Now you start to question, well, can we just like stimulate the ether, the energy that's all around us? This is what these magnetic motors that people are produced decades and decades ago. This is what they're doing. They actually were producing energy, some of them. I'm not going to pretend to claim they're all real, but the concept of using a magnetic motor is, of course, it's real. The moment you realize space isn't empty, of course, it's real. Of course, once you realize it's all electrostatics, then you're like, oh, well, I've got this thing called a permanent magnet, which is just an alignment of electrons that's going to manipulate any positive or any charges near it and pull things towards it. Basically just doing like a same thing we do with a ratchet. Like, I'm just, again, just spinning the generator, just doing work. If it can do kinetic energy and work, then we can manipulate. So yeah, I think that the, magnetic motors could be one way, cold fusion, plasma is naturally creating these self-organizing structures. Like, what people should really ask themselves is, why has hot fusion been such a failure? They've been researching hot fusion since at least the 80s. So 40 years. And we're still building these big reactors, and they're making them donut shaped because they realize they're tokamaks. Go look them up. They're all donut shaped, every single one. And this is toroidal shaped. And it's because they know that there's this control of electromagnetic fields within this shape. I guess what they forgot is to look at Ken Schuller's work and realize that we can actually produce a magnetic monopole, which then says we don't need the toroidal shape anymore. We can actually produce a spherical shape with it that's also naturally anti-gravity, because it's changing the permittivity of that space-time there. It's actually manipulating space-time and manipulating gravity by creating a region, a pressure differential. Probably quite analogous to using a balloon. Why does the balloon lift off? Why does the balloon defy gravity? Just buoyancy, right? So,
in going back to the plane for a minute, because
sure.
we're touching on a lot of really cool stuff. If we're talking about cold fusion and we're talking about anti-gravity in this case, how does gravity even factor into what we just saw in that video? Explain gravity as you see it, and now how that interacts with this whole plasma sphere.
Yeah, I would let Hal Puthoff in his 1989 paper really do the talking. Gravity is a 0-point fluctuation force. Kind of surprised this guy hasn't won the Nobel Prize already, honestly. You just look at all his papers, you'll realize that he understood this concept of 0-point energy very, very early on, going all the way back to the late 80s. And all of these concepts are the same because they're all based on the ocean of energy. A lot of people call it different things. I like to call it the ether because I want to give credit back to Tesla and Maxwell and all these old legends that they knew it was out there and real. It was really just us getting too stuck on this idea of Einstein's general relativity and this mythology around him that we've developed over the years, that has moved away from this idea of the ether. But there's this energy that's there. And Puthoff basically says if you manipulate this energy, then you're manipulating gravity as well. And that this is why we haven't been able to shield gravity, is that the gravity's at the 0-point energy level all around you. It's like if I rip this block off the wall, the 0-point energy is already there. In fact, the 0-point energy is at a scale that's so small that it's basically just passing through the wall at all times as well. Like it's in the wall as well as it's here, because it's at a scale even smaller than the atoms are at. It's passing between them all the time. In fact, this is the nothingness that's between the atoms, is this energy.
It's a stasis point, but gravity is gravity a stasis in stasis? Is it actually?
So, and then what he also adds in is that, so this energy is what's causing gravity, but also mass is just energy as well, because Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. This means that mass and energy are interchangeable. And so mass is energy. So a lot of people, when you look at these physics papers, somebody that understands 0-point energy will always as well point out that mass and energy are interchangeable. So why are we not seeing negative mass? Because negative energy isn't an exotic substance. It's all just energy. The fact that it's negative comes from the idea that it's going below the sea level, below the equilibrium, that we're pulling that energy out there. And this difference between the balance that we see on the surface, you can now have this idea of where's the energy coming from? Well, it's all coming from this balance we see on the surface. We're all just pulling the energy out, just like with this light right here. It's just pulling the energy from all around us everywhere. And then from this perspective, everything we see around us is because of this energy. And therefore, it's all electrostatic. So like Thomas Townsend Brown created an electrostatic asymmetry between two plates. And what happened? The plates just lifted off, right? Because one's chasing the other. This
Right.
is anti-gravity, And so what this is the same concept as what's happening all around us. We're just in the equilibrium. So yes, mass adds a lot of gravity because it's condensed energy. Mass is condensed energy. So if you're on a planet, it still explains basically everything general relativity points out is still true. It's just a different perspective on what's causing it. It's like, yes, these equations are still correct, they're mathematically correct, but we have to add in this extra equilibrium of energy that we're constantly in all the time. And then turns out this actually better explains the observations. Now space is a refractive index that we see. So we're seeing the light bend from gravitational lensing. It's still bending from gravitational lensing, but the light is actually going through this medium and transmitting through it. And as the gravity changes, the refractive index is changing. Now the light's bending around. So when I look at a star that's behind a black hole, this is why I can still see the light shine around the edges of the event horizon of the black hole. I think the edges of the event horizon are somewhere near there. But so the other thing too is it explains inertia. So this is really important because this is this concept of reducing mass of an object. And so that when the mass object moves, we don't, according to Einstein's equations, normally we would need more and more energy to push an object to the speed of light.
Right,
But
exactly.
if we remove all the energy of a region, what does that actually mean? If you were to pass through it, this means the speed of light is going to become functionally infinite if you were to really remove all of it. And if you are in that region now, you have no mass anymore relative to the outside region. So now, from this perspective, you're not going to fall or anything. Now, would there be some other biological effects? Possibly. And this is why I think that when we're looking at those balls of plasma, that's an autonomous drone. That's not a craft with somebody inside of it, because I wouldn't want to be inside that thing. Especially you can see the heat signature right there. I don't see a safe zone anywhere in that, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think that that's why they're spinning around the plane, is because somebody figured out that we can make this drone out of this, out of this physics concepts that the world doesn't really understand at the moment. And then if we spin them all together, and I presume you're using like a supercomputer or something, or some kind of tracking locking mechanism, once they're in place, then they're stuck. But they're spinning like this around the plane in formation. Like that's, to me, supercomputer AI level, maybe some other advanced tracking mechanism going on there. But then they're like, oh, well, if we just converge these together in a perfect equilateral triangle, the forces are going to counteract right in the middle on this plane.
Right.
And that's the part where, wow, like somebody had the foresight. And maybe if you believe it's aliens that did it, what have you. I mean, a lot of people think that we found this technology from them. I don't know, actually. Truthfully, I really have no idea. But somebody figured out that we can have this plasma become a drone, that we can remote control it, even though radio frequencies don't go through plasma, which tells you have to use another mechanism for it. Don't worry, we've got something for that too. And then if we take 3 of them and sync them up and jam them together, we can actually like break the Schwinger limit and create a wormhole. I mean, to me, that's just wow. Like it's not even sci-fi, because sci-fi hasn't even come up with this yet. Like even I've never seen any shows that even present this idea. And that's why I love it, because when you look at some of this stuff, this is the last thing I'll say and I'll let you jump in, is that I always thought it's going to be something stranger than what anyone expected with any of this stuff, aliens, energy, all this stuff. And man, it did not disappoint. Like this is pretty damn weird to have like balls of plasma that can float around, and we can remote control them and literally produce wormholes. And doesn't look like what I would have expected, but takes it a step further and shows that like there are these negative energy states, negative entropy states, cold that you see there, that is possible going below the equilibrium. So yeah.
I think it's brilliant. I love listening to how you explain things. I think you do a really good job of it, no matter what, and no matter what we're talking about or what, you're always presenting stuff. I swear, I'm always learning every time I watch one of your lives or something else. And I really encourage everybody to go out and check this out, because you take points of view that are so important. So let's just recap for a second, okay? I just
Sure.
want to go back through, we started out with EVOs, and then we walked into these plasma balls in the cold fusion. Cold fusion being that spot below 0 point, right? And
Well,
so,
so cold fusion is not necessarily the spot below 0 point. So let me, it'll probably help for people to understand the idea of cold fusion. Is actually cold fusion is a term that was coined this phenomenon that people were seeing. We've assumed that to get fusion energy to work, we needed temperatures and pressures equivalent to the sun. That's what we've assumed now is hot fusion, which seems practically impossible because I mean it's a pretty damn hot ball of a star sun we've got going on there. But we know that there's fusion happening in there. Conventional view is that these stars explode and then these elements spurse out everywhere, and then this cycle repeats itself, and this is how all the heavy elements on our Earth got here. That's what people believe. So, and I happen to believe it too, by the way. So cold fusion, Pons and Fleischmann, 1989 went straight to the media. These guys were professors and researchers, university. I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm not going to say it right now, but they went to the media and said, we've got fusion happening. And it's the only thing that we can explain. It must be fusion occurring. Elements, heavier elements are being formed in this experiment that we've got. And by the way, it's producing excess anomalous heat energy that we can't account for based on how much energy input's going on. Went to the media with it. Immediately got dubbed cold fusion because why is fusion happening at colder levels than the sun? Much colder, in fact. They were saying it was happening at room temperature. So this is like, we're a lot colder here than the sun, right? So I was actually just watching a documentary. I'm going to go over it actually on my stream. So if people are watching this, go find my live stream where I was talking about this. And one of the claims that I have not yet verified, but I'm running with it because it sounds good, is that 60 people were able to experimentally confirm this. And that doesn't surprise me, actually. I had already heard that it was experimentally basically proven that there is this phenomenon happening, but proving fusion is a lot harder than proving excess energy. And so what happened, long story short, was that this thing got suppressed. The Department of Energy came out strongly against it. They had, I think, MIT come out strongly against it as well. And then all the physicists, the difference being that engineers are people do experiments. Most physicists, vast majority, don't do experiments. They're just theoretical type people. They all came out and said, this is impossible. You can't be producing excess heat energy like that. That defies the laws of thermodynamics. Therefore, it's not possible. But that's all based on a conventional view that zero, that down here, there's no energy to give, right? How they think the glass is empty.
yeah.
If you look at the glass as being quite full, thermodynamics is not being broken by excess energy. Why? Because all the energy is coming from here, right? All the energy is. And the energy is being conserved because every energy I pull from down there is now appearing up over here. So there's no violation of energy. It's still always being conserved from that perspective. And the funny part about the second law of thermodynamics, which is a really confusing law, they need to simplify it, would state that in a closed system, you can't get more energy out than you're putting into it because you're always losing some energy due to inefficiency. Entropy, they call it. Can't have negative entropy, they would say. Can you? Well, how does a wind plant work then? Under those same laws, if I say, well, how does wind work? How does solar panel work? If I put the solar panel inside, it's not producing energy for me? So the answer is you can have external inputs from nature. You can have sun coming in. You can have wind being blown on your windmill. In any of these scenarios, it's the matter of how you define your closed system. Same thing with 0 point energy. There's this energy that's all around there. No one would argue if I pump up oil out of the ground, I can't use it. Like, yeah, of course you can, right? So same concept as well. So Pons and Fleischmann figured this out. Many scientists immediately figured out this was legit. Eugene Malov, who supposedly might have had some things befallen upon him in his death, he was a researcher as well that quit because they were not, basically this suppression came down. Anybody who was researching this stuff was persona non grata. If you were researching cold fusion, if you're looking into it, if you were whatever, you're going to lose your career. They basically labeled it like pseudoscience. It was crazy how easy it was for them to do it. which shows this level of psychological control over society, where if you go against the grain, you get ostracized. It's quite literally the emperor's no doesn't have any clothes, right?
Well,
Like
you're
there's
messing
just
up their program. I mean, you're interrupting the way they want to roll it out or keep it in place or use it or alter it or, the fact that you've stumbled upon this, and I wouldn't say stumbled because you're very adept and you're going after all these things with a tremendous um, fortitude to explain things that haven't been yet explained. Perhaps they know of them, but they're not explaining it. So you're forcing it to the table at this point. You're taking this and expanding on it in a way that nobody's ever done before. You're what's if we were to say, okay, your claim to fame is or would have been around the airplane disappearance, what is that?
yeah, that's all I would want, honestly. I just would want to be able to say that I got the truth for the missing plane and for the families that basically were gaslit and lied to for 10 years running. The rest of the stuff has really just been to achieve that one goal, to be honest with you. Although it seems absurd to say it, that's why I'm laughing, because it's like, well, yes, I'm basically trying to prove that free energy is real at this point, which is one of the biggest gaslighting jobs that they've ever done, to say that that violates the laws of thermodynamics. You can't possibly do that. But the reason why I push so hard on the science is I've always loved science and physics, and to find out that there's actually this whole branch of physics that's well researched, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of scientific papers. Some of the most accomplished people out there have been digging into zero point energy and this idea. And then the people that are right now still trying to prove cold fusion's real, they've all rebranded and done this other stuff because they realize it's just a big propaganda scheme. Like they started calling it low energy nuclear reactions because that's doesn't sound as gimmicky as cold fusion does. And I say, just like they tried to, rename UAPs from UFOs, like screw that, still calling it UFOs, still calling it cold fusion, still calling it the ether. We're keeping it old school. Don't care what anybody thinks. That's what we're gonna do. Just because that's what the people that came before us, I think, deserve, frankly. But yeah, so now they're calling it catalyzed fusion as well, which should make you wonder, well, what do you mean? So what's the fuel source? What's the catalyst
That's what I
that
was
you're
starting
using
with. That's
here,
what
right?
we began with, and like, what is the catalyst to this whole event? Like, how did it
So
begin,
it's
right?
usually just hydrogen. And the amazing part about this is that hydrogen is the most simple element there is. It's the very first element that would be formed if we're able to just pull energy out of the ether, which now I think we can say that we are able to do that. If we're able to do that, then we're technically able to manifest hydrogen out of nowhere. And if we're
And
able to manifest
plasma.
hydrogen and fusion, what is fusion? Fusion is literally producing new elements. So if we have a fusion process that produces excess energy, can manifest hydrogen and elements directly out of the vacuum,
Yeah.
and we can transmute elements. Now do you see, like, these are the reasons why there's a missing plane, where in an age where there's no way for a plane to disappear and go missing, and we're watching three balls of cold fusion, which we know are cold fusion because those things aren't white hot. If those things were hot fusion, it would just be a ball of white. That's how hot it would be, right? But it's not. It's lower temperature than the engines of the airplane. And you're looking at it, you're going, wait, what? If somebody was faking that without any physics knowledge, I mean, they would never even be able to come close, but let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. They would make those balls of white hot energy. Anyone on the world would, unless you're somebody that understands zero point energy, which is why the litmus test is that first video, or let me share it again real quick, is this video, is that you show anyone that doubts your view of energy in any form, you show them this and you go, what do you see here? Like, what do you see when you're looking at this plane disappear? Now, there may be other answers, but the answer that you generally want to get is like, any physicist that looks at this would say negative energy right here, negative energy. Why? They're going to say, because this is black. This is cold. This is an absorption of energy. This is an endothermic event. This is not a white hot explosion. Even if this was an implosion, it should still be releasing energy. There should be a white thing going on here. The fact this is black proves negative energy is real. So that's the litmus test for anyone out there, if your teacher comes back and they don't know the answer to that, then you want to learn from somebody else teaching physics, frankly.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a series of questions about this, and I want to kind of
Yes.
segue around a little bit. You started out in researching UFOs and things like that, trying to put answers to some of these questions, or maybe comparisons, or see if you could extract information thereof. What did you discover?
Okay, well, first I would say I didn't really start by doing UFOs, although, I guess if you could say I brought that up in terms of the people I went to first with, these videos and what have you. Um, but what I will say is I think pretty much achieved disclosure at this point. Like now, I didn't really understand what was going on with this UFO stuff, alien stuff, what have you. Amazing part is aliens still have no idea. So not sure. Could be if we can teleport objects, then probably aliens can be real. It wouldn't surprise me, but I just don't know. And there's a lot of options when it comes to aliens. My favorite, I guess, is ultra terrestrial. Like there's some other civilization on this planet. Somehow, either they look like us or they're underwater or under Earth. I don't know though. What I do know is from the science perspective, the only way that an object can hover, this is my favorite analogy, like this and defy gravity with no visible propulsion or fuel sources, it must be using 0 point energy. It must be cohering energy from the environment. According to E equals MC squared, there's literally no way for this thing to be carrying fuel. It would have to be a super lightweight fuel, and it's not going to be able to get enough energy out of it that it needs to be able to do what we're literally watching it do and fly around. Well, the answer, there you go, 0 point energy is the answer to why is the Department of Energy in charge of the UFO phenomenon? Because at the end of the day, it's all about that question. Where's the energy coming from for that thing to hover? The Department of Energy figured that out right away. This is why they have more power than the president has, because this is a weapon, weaponization, and literally reshape the planet, every possible perspective. Like we're talking about no scarcity whatsoever. So if you look at the UFO phenomenon now under this lens, I think the answer is pretty clear. These plasma orbs, we've figured out how to make these. I can basically prove it by looking at Ken Shoulders' work, Salvatore Paez's patents and work. Can't wait to talk to him again.
You're going to
And
be speaking
also
to him when?
November 24th. So
On your
2
show.
weeks.
So everybody has to tune in for that.
Yeah, that's gonna be a good one. You guys aren't gonna want to miss that.
What's
But
your favorite? But go on, we'll come back to him.
yeah, so you hypersonic planes use a plasma sheath in front of them. They produce a plasma sheath. This actually reduces the drag on the plane. So I strongly speculate that we figured out how to use that plasma sheath and turn it into a ball of plasma. And now you've got this orb of plasma here spinning around and doing what Ken Shoulders said that these orbs do, producing potentially free energy while they're doing it at the same time. And then you look at Hal Puthoff's patent. Hal Puthoff, he is kind of one of the most OG Black Project engineers that's still on the planet right now. Extremely intelligent guy. Look at his patent. It's just called communication system. What? Or communication method. You're like, that's a pretty obscure thing. If you understand the physics and you look at it, you realize right away this is a gravity communication device. It's basically shooting a beam, a longitudinal beam through the ether. So there's no electromagnetic effect related to it. So if you were to try to look and detect it using electromagnetic waves, you're not going to detect it at all. But there is a phase shift. Ehrenhoff-Bohm effect shows there's still a phase shift based on the potential alone, even with no electromagnetic field. So, and we can detect that phase shift and just use it like as a communication device, same way we would with like Morse code or what have you. So now we can remote control something at a distance. We can have a scalar communication device like Hal Puthoff's patent, and we can remote control a ball of plasma, even though radio frequencies would otherwise not be able to penetrate. So there you go. Now we can explain why there's this orb. We can even give it a general history in terms of when we figured this orb technology out. Sometime probably in the early 2000s, just based on, I mean, we might have known about the concepts before, but like to really like have some orbs where you can spin around a plane and zap it out of the sky, you know? So 2014 plane disappears. This is probably, they haven't used this very much, if at all. It might even be one of these things where you use this kind of technology and now everybody knows about it. And now you've just given up your ace in the hole, right? And maybe you only use it because you think they're about to have a breakthrough anyway. I don't know. But
Well, what would they use it for primarily? I mean, besides weaponry and looking, I mean, I guess we go back to why would they take that plane out of the sky and where did it go to? Does it disintegrate in that explosion and that's what they want, or does it go somewhere else and show up in another space-time continuum?
Yeah, and I think I generally try to keep it as grounded as I can, which is hard to do when you're talking about wormholing airplanes away. But technically, all those things are solutions to physics and Matt and Einstein's equations. They're actually really not in the woo at all. All points in space and time are connected, though, through this extra dimension that is out there that has all this energy at it. And so what we see is really just a holographic projection of the information that's being processed, which means that we can actually just teleport from one region to the next. This is actually how real holography works, is that it's just a plate and you can break this plate in half and all the information is still on either half of the plate. So really at the end of the day, we're inside of like a microchip on a flat surface and we're next to each other and we don't perceive that we are next to each other. Sorry, can you repeat the question? I went on a
No,
tangent.
I'm down so many trails in my head about it. I think I'm thinking in terms of where did they end up and
Oh yeah,
like
sorry.
what happened to them
Well, so
potentially.
to me, that's a teleportation event that we're seeing there. That energy is being sucked away from somewhere, it has to go somewhere else. So I would imagine that plane to show up on the other side. It's also too elaborate what you're seeing go on with the orbs. If that was just an annihilation, I would imagine it to be more direct because you don't really care about the side effects or if you only destroy part of the plane or what have you. Plus, you could just use conventional weaponry, but you probably get caught in those situations. Now, the motive is definitely the Freescale semiconductor engineers. In fact, my plans are to actually learn how to produce microchips because now I'm so convinced that that's the future. Magnetic motors and that type of free energy, whatever, that's kind of archaic. Like, yeah, it's okay, cool. You figured out how to make a permanent magnet and abuse the ether and pull a little bit of energy out. But the Casimir effect gets exponentially more powerful the smaller you get, the closer you get with your plates.
Well, do
And
you
it gets
know
to the
about, excuse me, do you know about Micron? It's a new corporation going
no, no.
in Syracuse, New York, and they're going to create conductor chips.
Yeah, yeah. And if you look at semiconductors, what are semiconductors? Actually, it's a branch of different electro devices like transistors and things like that. So really what a semiconductor company is just making microchips, basically, is what it comes down to.
Or
And that's what I want to be
transducers.
doing because that's to me, that's the future of all of this is that you get it smaller and smaller you go, the more powerful the effects are. So you really want to be controlling this microchip, and the microchip is really just a bunch of little elements that are stacked up next to each other. But you know what their properties are, and so you've created a circuit and you know what's going to happen. That's the real answer. That's the future. And
And so
turns out
what
there
would
was
you
20 semiconductor scientists and engineers on board this plane. Where it's like, to be honest, that's scarier than AIDS researchers being on your plane. Like that's as scary as it gets once you realize that all of this is not really even about proving the science is real. We're well past that. The governments and the defense contractors who know about this, they're now playing a game where they're trying to advance it faster than the other people. They're trying to make their microchips smaller and smaller and smaller and more efficient faster than the other people do. Because first person to unlock this just gets unlimited power, unlimited. And they're playing like espionage with one another, trying to steal each other's research, spying on one another, counter espionage. In fact, I think that what happened to MH370 was counter espionage. And if we teleported the plane, the only place for it to go is Diego Garcia military base. And I think it was a message to China as well. I think it's appropriate to call it sixth generational warfare, which is control over space time itself. Crazy. They actually have a term for it already.
No, I believe that 100%. So what do you think about space-time? What is your definition of space-time?
Well, my favorite term for it is just calling it space-time ether because I think of it as like a blank canvas on which you spilled a bunch of paint and the paint just spreads out over the canvas. The paint is all energy and mass in the universe, in the observable universe and everything below sea level as well. And then if you believe in the Big Bang, this is consistent because you need dark energy to explain how the universe expanded faster than the speed of light. Otherwise, that's not possible. There must be a negative energy. And that negative energy is the energy all around us. And then what happens is eventually the paint covers the canvas and then it's in an equilibrium. You don't see the paint flying up and down, right? So the same kind of concept is that you've covered your surface and you've created your space-time. And it doesn't have to just be like this. This is just simple for me to explain to other people, but it's really a three physical dimensional space-time that's been created from the energy expanding all throughout it. And then there's peaks and valleys, and we call those peaks and valleys planets, moons, suns, anything that has an accumulation of mass. But that's not enough. That's general relativity. But then we say, well, dark energy, what's that? That's not in general relativity. So we just make up this term because we need to figure out how can the universe expand faster than the speed of light? Well, dark energy is negative energy. They're just using new terms to explain something they don't want to believe in, which is the 0 point energy all around us. Quantum mechanics already figured it out. Quantum mechanics already proved there's this huge amount of energy there. It's just a matter for general relativity to try to rationalize it, and they can't. They can't unify it at the moment. But the 0 point energy does. It unifies it for us.
Well, have they looked into, has anyone considered the concept of sound within that, like the plasma orbs and the actual sound or the intelligence of the meeting of that? I mean, you talk about the physics of it, but what about the actual like sentient intelligence around it or the sound wave that goes through it that carries things or moves things even?
Well, waves are super important, extremely important. And sound, I think, can be used to create anti-gravity as well. In fact, there's a video that I post every once in a while on that shows them using acoustic waves to like literally levitate an object, and the object's in the middle just moving around with the acoustic waves. Because what you find is that a lot of this comes down to constructive and destructive interference, which is having the waves cancel each other out or get into these certain harmonics where they're stabilized. So where you have like a coherent wave structure. We would
Do
call it
they
a
know?
standing wave. You know, a standing
Excuse me,
wave would
yeah.
mean that if you create a wave between 2 points, the wave it's like in a perfect equilibrium. It doesn't look like it's moving at all. It looks like it's just stuck there in one spot, as opposed to moving all around. So, and this is what I would say, me contracting and expanding this would be our frequencies that we're changing here and our wavelengths by moving this around. And we're trying to find a coherent structure where our wave is perfectly standing. And then the question is, can you amplify it? Can you turn up the dial and shoot it up to increase the peak? Because if you can, now we're just talking about amplifying energy, which would also theoretically violate the laws of thermodynamics. But if we understand we have this reservoir of energy, then it's not really violating those laws anymore. So
I
yeah,
just
what I wanted to get across is that you can use sound to do it. I think these balls of energy could quite easily be turned into a doomsday weapon because of A, being able to just pull energy out of the environment.
right, yeah.
Uh, B, I think that they're literally producing a black hole, a very small one that's a stabilized black hole that dissipates. That as long as they're beaming energy into it, that it'll stay formed. But the moment they stop, it'll dissipate due to Hawking radiation and black body radiation, just basically radiating energy away. And then in terms of the question for me is, can those balls of energy be conscious? That seems like such a far out there question to ask.
That's what I'm thinking, and that's why I'm wondering if do they have intelligence in them because there's a cohesiveness that forms, and you watch that kind of take place. Okay, it could be a physics phenomenon in a just a kind of a distance, a magnetic pull of things, but it's is there intelligence in their cohesion and
Yeah.
their wave
And I'm
formation?
not going to pretend to be an expert on a lot of that, but what I will say is that if they are conscious, I don't think it's in a way that we quite understand. I don't think it's as simple as looking at it like human beings like that. I mean, we're a biological being, and therefore we have a brain, and so we think about things differently. But at the core function, if we look around at life, even trees, life, we have growth and we have an absorption of energy going on with life, right? That's really all that you boil it down to is like you have this growth and you have energy being absorbed. What
Mhm.
if all life is a permanent connection to the energy source? That
Right,
we're just like
exactly.
on this ocean, and all it takes is anything to be on this ocean can theoretically be alive if it starts pulling energy out. And what are
Mhm.
we're doing that we're not directly connected to it as we would perceive, but when we're eating food and we're converting that to fuel and to energy that we're using, we can't like stop our energy and then start it back up again. If we did that, we call it dying. and you don't come back to life if you do that, right? And if that's the case, then a ball of coherent plasma that has a natural asymmetry, like a permanent battery that's just constantly producing energy, is that alive? Like, can it be alive? You know, like a year ago, I would have thought that's crazy. In fact, when Sal Paez on our first interview brought it up, I was like, okay, is this guy getting too far in the woo right now? And then I started digging into it. I was like, whoa, actually, he might not have gone far enough into the woo. Like, now I'm sitting here like, man, can a ball of plasma be conscious? Like,
My
ah.
question to you is, why wouldn't it be conscious? If it's drawing in, there has to be an
Here's the crazier
intelligence,
part. You know what?
right?
I have a fun video to show, I think. Hold on, let me
All
see
right,
if
I'm
I can.
serious because if
Yeah.
everything has a bit of consciousness to it, and it is in kind of harmony, if you will, at that 0 point, what
Yeah, I
then
think
breaks it
that
off?
you could argue that it is. That's why, like, I don't know. For me, it's one of those things that just needs more research. Same thing as a lot of people ask me about time. Is the plane going to show up 10 years in the future? Or if I've seen Manifest and Lost? I don't know.
Yeah,
I need
right.
more evidence. I need more evidence, right? Like
Manifest was
it
trippy.
gets really, we're already on broaching on physics concepts that are very taboo as it is. So I don't really want to pretend to know stuff that I don't. So I want to show you this though, real quick. There might be music associated with this. So these are plasma structures in outer space. Look at the self-organization of it. It's not just diffused throughout the medium that they've confined it to. It's like naturally cohering. You can even see these like tendrils forming off of it. So you see, like, if you could imagine, like, for example, the MH370 balls of plasma, like, these are probably not perfect approximations, but you can start to see why we're seeing that vortex motion. And I can't even remember what the next part of this is, so we'll have to see this. So why is it doing this? There's this natural equilibrium between, like, the Casimir effect, we believe, which is pulling things together, and the repulsive force of two electrons that would want to repel one another, that are reaching an equilibrium on a small scale. This is the part that freaked them out the most, is that what they saw here was this void begin to form, just a completely empty void in the plasma. Like, why is this
Well,
even?
maybe that's the 0 point in the center of the plasma, and the other is configuring to that 0 point, no?
Well, it's because, and we'd imagine we look at like water, we should really look at it all like fluid, because that's really what it is. I would argue it's like a superfluid, where in the water, it's because you would have this attractive force along the edges of the water. Same reason why, like, the water can go over the cup a little bit and it doesn't immediately pour off, right? So the answer is why? Electricity, static electricity, positive and negative charges. It's the answer to basically everything in the universe, and it's the answer to why this is forming as well. Yeah, look at this. Holy crap.
Yeah, that's
I just look at this and I
wild.
go, okay, yeah, so there's a black hole in the middle of the plasma orbs. And then, yeah, this part too, I mean, look at these tendrils that form.
That's
That's
so
just
cool.
wild to me. In fact,
It's
this
like a
might even be
dance.
like the shape of the universe or galaxies, you know?
Yeah, it's like a
Yeah, oh,
dance.
in
There you
fact, here
go.
we go. This is where they're showing that
Yeah,
this is analogous to galaxy formation. And right away, if you look at it, you can tell that the speeds on the edges and the speeds in the center are already looking much more similar to what we observe when we look at galaxies. The edges are moving faster here than the middle is moving. So then the question is, okay, maybe we're looking at something different than, like, maybe this is what we're actually looking at when we look out there. We're looking at this plasma interacting with the vacuum. Because otherwise, this should just be random, but it's not
right.
random at all, is it? It's like, this is like a crab structure right here.
It's supporting itself on in time with the bouncing motion of up and down. It's not breaking free
Oh, yeah.
from it.
Oh, and here's the last one. Look at this. What does that look like? This is plasma.
Helix. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a double helix. So
Wow.
I knew you'd enjoy this one. I want to
Yeah.
point out one thing real here is that, do you guys know there's this story going around? I think it's true that crabs have, like, independently evolved like 6 different times. Like,
That's
they're,
interesting.
yeah. So this makes me wonder, if you look at this, it looks like a crab to
It
me.
does. It does. And they would seem like they would have a lot of longevity the way they can go in and out and anywhere. And
So
also,
plasma is the secret. That's what's going on with the UFO phenomenon. I think that's why we're seeing these balls of light a lot more often as well. We're seeing these triangle formations locked in like this. Is that somebody here on this planet has figured out these balls of plasma? Now, does that mean that there's not aliens and UFOs and flight saucers? No, not at all. In fact, I'm more perplexed by that question after I've dug into a lot of this in general. But for me, it's like, man, figuring out free energy and cold fusion, balls of plasma, missing airliner, that's enough. Like leave some for somebody else.
oh,
Somebody
come
else can.
on, you're on a roll. Keep going. Hey, I have a question about black holes and wormholes.
Yeah.
Have they measured sound in them?
No, I don't think so. I think they're all too far away for black holes, but that would be an interesting thing to bring up. Usually they're talking about light. Now, I will bring up one interesting recent discovery. I think it's recent, maybe not. One thing that's been going around now is really interesting is this idea that black holes along the event horizon, which is the point where light can no longer escape this, and this is why it shows up as all black, uh, you have the dynamic Casimir effect happening along the event horizon, which means that photons are being pulled directly out of the ether there. So it looks extremely bright, actually, if you were to look at that thing. So it's probably creating like a ring, I would imagine, of bright photons being shot straight out of the ether. Um, but I think to your question on the wormholes, what I'll say is that a lot of people ask, like, could you survive this wormhole? One of the biggest early surprises for me was when I started Googling about wormholes. I just kind of thought it was a science fiction thing. I was like, is wormholes like really a thing? Turns out it is really a thing. Not just really a thing, but like from 2020 onwards, multiple papers were written showing that wormholes are humanly traversable, meaning that you would not get ripped to shreds from the gravitational, you're not going to get spaghettified, which means
Yeah.
that it's really just like going through a doorway, which means that probably Star Trek and even Star Wars, like hyperspace, like that's what a wormhole really is. It's just a situation where you're locally going faster than the speed of light from the outside perspective, which means it looks like you're teleporting, but from your perspective, you're pulling space-time together to make a bridge, and now you just go from here to here. So for you, it means like you just walk through a doorway. Like now you're just on the other side.
So
And
is
this is
that
where all the
technically a,
time implications come into play. Go ahead.
excuse me, is that a portal then?
A lot of, the first video interview I did, I went on Tony Merkel of the Confessionals. Love that guy. And he immediately called it portals, MH370 portals. And at first, I'm not somebody who really cares what they call the videos. Sometimes people do say mean stuff. Sometimes they go kind of wacky, whatever. But at the time I thought it was kind of wacky, and now I'm like, yeah, actually it's a portal, it's a wormhole. And I actually think that Stargate SG1 or Stargate with the Stargates that, we can make those too. Like it's just the same technology. You're creating a permanent connection as opposed to one that was open for like zero point 0.1 or zero point 0.2 seconds. But the moment you open the door to any of this, the moment you rip open Pandora's box, like people have to realize what's coming with this. A lot of people are going to wonder, oh, why should I trust you? Whatever. Don't trust me if you don't want to. That's why everything I say is backed by science, and I give you the scientific papers to read. Come up with your own interpretations. I think that the world's better if we're all different. But what I'll say is the reason why they're hiding this, the reason for the suppression, is that the moment you even tip that Pandora's box open, everything's coming out. What is everything? Well, we talked about some of the energy generation concepts, free energy right off the bat. Warp drive, wormholes, literal teleportation. We talked about alchemy and literally manifesting hydrogen and energy straight out of the vacuum. Transmutation. So we're talking about scarcity, literally quite disappearing off the face of our planet, maybe even within our lifetimes. Healing capabilities. We could potentially remove fixed cancers. We might be able to apply reverse entropy to your body and you reverse age. So just you locally, everything else is still going forward, but you reverse age. We can probably create cloaking devices as well
I think they've
using
already
this
done that.
concept. I mean, I would even argue that the line between cloaking and teleportation is razor thin, because if you're blocking all the electromagnetic fields from hitting you, yes, you're cloaked, but you're also literally teleporting yourself because you've moved space-time all around you at that point. If you've really blocked all the 0 point energy, that's a wormhole. Like that's what we're talking about, is like you're producing this wormhole out there. And that's the same idea as what they're trying to do with like the Philadelphia experiment and these cloaking technologies. They were trying to block all the electromagnetic radiation. Turns out like they potentially created a Casimir shell accidentally without even realizing it, and had this time dilation effect happen. So
But then they had to correct it because they got stuck.
I don't know about
Had to
correcting
go.
it. I feel like it's a one-way trip. This is the thing about time travel. I don't like to dig too much into it because I need more evidence, but I do know that time dilation is real, which means there's a dial to time, which means that your dial and my dial might not be the same. They're just right now they're set basically the same because we're both on the same planet, which has a relatively similar circumference, so we're both experiencing the same amount of gravity. But the more or less gravity you feel, the more your dial changes. So what this means is the twin paradox, where if I were to go away to an area that has more or less gravity than here, we're going to see a time change effect when I come back, which means that if I fly back here, now you're going to be substantially older, or I'm going to be substantially older. From our own frame of reference, we'll both have experienced the same amount of time. Like, you know, we are, when you reach my age, wherever, your age is based on how much time you've experienced. So that means I can experience more time in your lifetime or what have you. So what that means ultimately is you can go to the future. Like I could go off somewhere else and I could come back and I would only have aged a day, but everybody on this planet could be gone and it could be 1,000 years later. You know, like that's real. You could actually do that. So it's like the ultimate cryogenic chamber is not to even make a cryogenic chamber at all. If you want to go to the future, you just want to accelerate yourself close to the speed of light. The closer you can get, the more you are going to slow down relative to everybody else. Then you come back and yeah, it's the future now.
Well, it's kind of like the now space and being in the 0 point, right? So that kind of is a suspension space overall, I think. I think the 0 point is
Well, here's the
speaking to
trick.
that very thought.
Mass is energy. And now we realize that mass and energy give rise to space-time, give rise to gravity. Gravity and space-time direct the flow of time. So now we realize without matter and energy, there is no time anymore as well. Which really then, to me, it's chicken and the egg. Like, what came first? Did time come first, or is time a property of all the energy and the matter? I don't know. My good buddy Roy D. Herbert, physicist on X, he would say he believes time is the ultimate, you know, base material of everything, which I think is a elegant way to think about it. But either way, we both agree that, you know, space time is a weird thing, and you want to be careful. I'm not going to be the first person to go through the wormhole because I'd be afraid that you're going to pop out and it's going to be 1,000 years in the future. And you're going to be like, okay, well, everybody I
Yeah.
know is gone. There's
How
no
do
going back.
you well, talking about the fractals for a minute, in what you just showed us with the plasma organizing itself like the crab
Mhm.
and then it going up and down, those were that was an example of what you brought up early on about the plane and the plasma orbs is that the fractal organization came into a coherence and the coherence then changes how the whole structure interacts with that 0 point around it, changing all of it around it from the base up and reconstructing it, moving out, coming in. So, what is it that you think of in terms of how the plane actually moved through that space that into that wormhole and how that whole fractal I don't even know how to say it, how the fractals came into organization to move it to that point of the next expression of it, I guess is the best way I can say it, if you can follow me.
Yeah, and probably be best if I just show Bob Greenier's clip here on this. I won't, it's like 7 minutes long, so I'll skip through some of it, but I think this one explains it pretty well.
When I saw the Jeremy Rees in C, warmer, this would force them to make this video with what we know now. This would kind of imply that these are warmer than the environment, and for that to happen, one might expect that if they didn't have their own energy source, they must be extracting the energy from the environment.
You'll notice some similarities in some of the stuff he says here, and he actually brings up the exotic vacuum objects here as well. And this was before I met Bob Greenier, and this is the low energy nuclear reactions guy. He just saw the videos as well and realized, holy crap, I have to make a video about this because like this is he most likely knew he was looking at cold fusion right away. He's talking about the Ukanavasara being part of this fractal structure that you see, toroidal structure. He shows he's got it on his neck right there. He even mentions here seeing the non-radiating barrier around the orb as well, which is the area where you can see why you can see it as an orb. That's the non-radiating barrier. It's not a plasma. It's not like a piece of glass there or something like that. Okay, here you go. So I think this is his monopole presentation. So he's going to explain, I think, the fractal structure here. I think he does.
And we have shown that our work is actually more accurate than this. So if you can imagine this here, this is where the torus is kind of focusing its moment to lead to the monopole location, the topological monopole here. This is a dome that you get. So here, this is this top. So that the monopole is actually at the bit.
Actually, I didn't want the monopole part.
Very clear. It's like it's cohering energy inversion, the inversion eruption beam coming. Incredible. This one and have everything back.
I'm gonna play this part here just because it's
incredible understanding of technology that no one had an understanding outside of the black world, even if there was anyone that had an understanding in the black world.
So that's just where Bob Greenyer says that like nobody could really have come up with what he sees here, especially the thermal video is the one where he's like, nobody could have figured this out because the science wasn't even out there.
This one.
So what he's basically saying here, I thought he had this in this clip, but I don't think he did. Oh, okay. He explains when he pulls them together, they're creating what he calls a Tor -1. That might be what you were trying to refer to, which is a fractal toroidal structure. If you look at the video about smoke rings, you see the smoke fly out, and then again, it creates these rings in the perpendicular direction. And that's what Bob Greenyer is saying here is happening, is they're creating their own torus. They have a torus inside here. We don't see it on the video, but it's in there. And they are creating their own torus, a donut ring around the plane, which is why they go vertical in this video.
Okay, that is the bit that changes epsilon.
And when he's saying it changes epsilon 0, what he's saying is it's changing the permittivity of space itself. And that's why we see this orb structure here. This is exactly what Ken Shoulders said in his paper called Permittivity Transitions, where he's saying that the plasma changes the permittivity of free space. It's changing the permittivity of the medium.
0.
Why? Because it's a drain. It's literally like pulling the drain on your toe.
Okay, the permittivity of the vacuum. Okay. And it's pulling it in here. It's correctly facing forward as it is at the moment. And so what you would want to do is you would want to bring these in, get them into their alignment, get them tracking the device accurately, get them equidistant, and then what you would do is you would rotate their orientation so their toroidal moments link up and make a super tor that would then have its azimuth going through the center of the craft that you are wanting to either disappear or teleport.
So there's your answer right there, is that they're realigning because they want to have their beams target the center, a perfect alignment of the center of the craft, and then they're going to converge. And that's how they're able to create their Tor -1. Now, if you look at it from the perspective of scalar physics is basically this idea is if I zero out my electromagnetic waves, so I've got my electromagnetic waves like this, if I can zero it out, there's nothing left. Now I'm potentially shooting a longitudinal wave through the medium, through the ether. And this is what Hal Puthoff's patent is doing as well. So if you look at it from that perspective, then you can realize how we could actually transmit like a longitudinal beam, a scalar beam, a gravitational beam, you know, through the medium. And what they're then doing is they're creating a 0 point where all the waves are canceling each other out right there, and it's producing a very powerful field, electromagnetic field in that location. And this is the part where like cutting edge now, that's what I know, right? It's a lot, frankly, but there's still a lot more to know, which is like how exactly do they determine the size of the wormhole? You know, how do they determine that? To me, I think the answer is how charged the orbs are, how much electromagnetic or magnetic charge is on those, and then how quickly they converge. The quicker they converge, the more powerful it's going to be. And so how would you test this? Just jam magnets together. Try to change it, like change the the speed at which you do it, what have you. There is a time component to a magnetic field. So, and you
Yeah.
can test this by like one of those like little metal iron filing things, and you can like jam a magnet on, watch the nails go up or whatever. You can use one of those and you can see this effect as well. So ultimately, I don't know the exact answer to how they're pulling it off, but I have more than enough evidence to say, like, if this was a murder trial, for example, like, we can convict the US government of having done this. And either they're going to prison for the rest of their lives or they're going to point at somebody else. If they want to blame the, reptilian aliens for doing this, great, but they better have some good evidence that shows how the reptilians made these orbs, where I've got like the whole history of it laid out.
It's fascinating. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking your time and walking through this with us here at Making Life Brighter. And everyone can follow along. Now, let's just quick talk about your upcoming interview, which you're so excited about, and the end of November. Let's touch on why that's important to you and
Sure.
who this great person is.
Yeah, Salvatore Pais. So Salvatore Pais has these 5 patents that are out there. High energy electromagnetic field generator, which can produce energy levels that are what we need in order to break the Schwinger limit, which I would say is probably producing a wormhole. Piezoelectricity is like squeezing something to produce electricity. Piezoelectric induced high temperature superconductivity. Superconductivity is one of these quantum effects we see on the macro scale. Inertial mass reduction for a transmedium craft. That one right alone says UFOs all over it. And then high frequency gravitational wave generator. I think I said them all. High frequency gravitational wave generator is really interesting because I would say that's pretty much an exact analogy to what we're seeing those orbs doing as they're making how they're flying, basically. There's this cold, dark line in front of the orbs when they move. And I think they're producing a gravitational wave. And I think they're reorienting those waves onto the plane, and they're shooting those at the plane in a perfect triangle formation, as any 0-point formation would do. Like, this is a 0-point formation, but this is also a 0-point formation, perfect triangle. So I think that's what those things are trying to do. And Salvatore Pais may have engineered those orbs, or he possibly knows who did. It's a small world in these engineering communities. You don't have 5 patents. Oh, the last one was magnetically confined fusion device. And I'm going, wait, okay, so we've got fusion here, we've got gravity manipulation, we've got inertial mass reduction, we've got energy being produced. I'm going, he's explaining the orb. He's explaining the ball. If you add that up, it creates the ball of plasma that just floats around freely, that produces free energy, that defies gravity and inertia and can go through the water. The one thing that I'm going to say right now that I've never said anywhere just yet, my newest theory is that these might be locked to the Earth. And what I mean by that is that they might be using hydrogen from the air or from the water to produce their plasma. If that's the case, they might only be able to go between water and the air, but not into outer space, because there may not be enough hydrogen in outer space to propel them, which would be, man, that would be quite the shift if that was true. If we can make these plasma orbs, but there's a huge limitation. They can't leave that. They can't go into outer space because the plasma just falls apart, and then, they have a time limit. Like, wow, that would be crazy. But I think
That changes the game, really.
that changes the game in a big way. Because now it's like, ooh, can aliens actually get here again? Like, we were doing so well. We had teleportation figured out, but now we need, and there's this other theory, 4 orbs theory, which I'm a big fan of now, actually, because I've heard other people mentioning it, including Bob Lazar, even though he mentioned it in the 90s, which is this idea that you have a 4th orb. You have your 3 orbs over here, right? Or triangle formation. Wish I need my rubber bands. And you have your 4th orb here, and they're entangled. And so no matter how far apart they get, you have this entanglement effect happening. So the moment you wormhole the plane here, where does the plane go? It snaps to the 4th orb. And so you manipulate entanglement, and now you've created basically a magic trick where you're tricking the universe into thinking that the plane is actually over here, which is really equivalent to something called the double slit experiment. Very, very weirdly similar, where in the double slit experiment, we shoot these photons through two gates, and we would expect to see two lines where the photons are shooting through, just like if I were to throw a baseball or an apple, right? It's going to create these lines. But no, it creates a wave function, creates a probability chart. Could be here, could be here. We don't know. And you're like, wait, huh? Well, let me look. I'm going to look because I want to see these things doing this. How are they pulling this off? Any measurement, doesn't even have to be human eyeball. It can just be a detector that you set up that tries to detect where it goes, collapses the wave function. All of a sudden, there's not these lines anymore. Now there's just two lines. It's like, oh, we got caught. We got to pretend like we're acting like particles now. You're like, wait, so we can break down the wave function in the double slit experiment. What if I revert the plane to a wave function? Now the plane's anywhere. Now the plane's maybe in the Maldives. Now the plane's maybe in Nicobar Islands. Where? And now what if I break that wave function down? What if I look? What if I do a measurement? Really, that's what looking is. Now it says, oh, got to go back to my location. But now my location is over here. That's what I fundamentally believe is happening with respect to the plane and our universe. And it means some pretty huge things with regards to our universe. I mean, just the free energy aspect alone is huge. But this idea that our universe is an actual hologram, like it's a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's a simulation or whatever. Well, everything's still real that we're doing here.
Are you saying that the witness perspective changes the outcome?
I don't think that I'm not necessarily going into like the many worlds theory here. Like my current belief is that everything's kind of deterministic as it is, but we have some level of control on a small scale for what happens. But
like if the plasma balls have intelligence and
yeah,
the intelligence of the witness is witnessing that and it changes, would that affect what's happening with that theory?
Maybe. That's a good question. I think that my belief is a lot of people think that it's a matter of consciousness interacting with space is what causes the breakdown of the wave function. There's like some conscious thing happening. But this is why it was so important when I brought up the computer thing. So it actually doesn't even have to be a person looking at it. Even a computer, a non-sentient being, can cause the wave function to collapse. So in that sense, I wouldn't say so. For me, the big thing about the intelligence of the orbs or the sentient capability of the orbs is like, did we just create artificial life? And if it can be life, then can other people have figured out how to create it? Because it actually turns out it might be really, really simple. Like as simple as us figuring out how to make fire. You know, we are just actually still dumb cavemen. We just think that we're so smart now because we figured out fire makes things go boom, and that can shoot things into the sky. Like, end of the day, people looking back 100 years from now, probably even that shorter period of time, are going to think we were just like primitive, like idiots, like riding around on horses. Because they're going to be like, no, we figured out balls of plasma, and all we have to do is press this switch, and now I've got a ball of plasma that's floating around, and it can talk to me and act like an Alexa and all this weird stuff, right? Any species out there could have figured this out. Because again, these are discoveries of nature. This is not a situation where I need some complex things. Like the moment I understand frequencies, waves, and the idea of what a plasma or sometimes called like a Bose-Einstein condensate, these things that have quantum effects at the macroscopic level, the moment you understand that, you understand intuitively unification of all physics, a fundamental understanding of how the universe really works. And once you understand that, well, oh boy, I mean, this is why people talk about the Kardashev scale. They're like, oh, we're going to go from a type 0 civilization to a type 1 civilization, and we're going to make a Dyson sphere around our sun. God, those, I don't like to be rude, so I'm not going to be rude, but I'm just going to say those ideas that's caveman thinking. Like, they're just thinking like, oh, the sun is the best it's going to get. When you really break out, you realize right away when you look at the 0 point energy why there's no Dyson spheres. We don't need the sun. The sun's getting its energy from another source as well, which is not as simple as just all the elements in there. It's literally pulling energy from the 0 point vacuum. It's like basically like a white hole, the opposite of a black hole. We're seeing this energy come out, or maybe it is a black hole, whatever at the center. But either way, this massive amount of energy is flowing out. We should be trying to tap into that source of energy the same way that the sun is, and that's what the future thinking people are sitting here doing, is that we're looking for ways where what's the paradigm shift, The last quick quote I want to give is one that I saw actually. That this is a message that a lot of people have kind of said before. At every point in human history, scientists and scholars thought they had an understanding of how the world works around them and thought the facts they believed were above contention. In every instance, they were wrong. What made you think right now is any different? That's what I want people to think about, is that every single time in human history, we've always thought we understand it all. Anybody that understands it differently must be wrong. Every single time, everyone's been wrong in history. We've always advanced our understanding. We understand, we went from Isaac Newton with the apple dropping, our understanding of gravity, to Einstein and general relativity, took the same concepts, just advanced it. And now we're going to take 0-point energy and we're going to advance general relativity to the next level. And we're going to realize that the universe is electric in its nature, and that this will explain gravity, inertia, mass. It will explain dark energy, dark matter as well. And we'll have a completely new understanding of our cosmos. In fact, my most controversial thing I'll say, probably not given what I've said, but what if the Big Bang didn't even happen? What if the reason why everything is redshifted when we look out in any direction is not because everything's moving far away from us and accelerating away from us? What if it's because the light that bounces off those objects and comes at us is being redshifted because it's losing energy as it transmits through the medium? Because now we realize it's not an empty vacuum. So now you can lose energy when you're transmitting through it. Small amounts, but you'll lose an amount, especially over a very, very long periods of time. And you lose that energy, what happens? It becomes redshifted. So what if that's the case? And what if the universe is a lot older than what we think? And it's not as simple as 14 billions, or sorry, now it's 26 billion. That's the new estimate. What if it's 1 trillion years old? I mean, if it's something that's that old, now the alien question just becomes a matter of like, does their civilization interact or cross our civilization on the time scale? Because those periods of time, now anything's possible, right?
Absolutely. And they say right now that a whole nother galaxy is merging into our galaxy at the moment, and they're converging. So we have quite a bit of shift taking place. We're at a place we've never been to before. And I love what you just said regarding that theory and the quote before it, because I think the key word in that quote that you read is the word believe. What is the belief? And you mentioned in there facts, but what are the beliefs regarding the facts? And then when you potentially, just like you said in your theory, take away the structured belief around something, maybe you stumble upon new facts and you can analyze those facts from a different position. So,
You know what's sad about science is that it has pretty much just become a belief system now. It used to be something great, and we've lost all the great scientists because science itself has become a corrupted institution. In fact, it was Julian Schwinger, the guy who invented the Schwinger limit, the Schwinger. He found out you amplify electromagnetic fields reach a certain point, and they reach this threshold. You break through it. Now photons are starting to be released from the vacuum, we call it. He got convinced that cold fusion was legitimate at near his end of life. He died in the 90s. So 1989, Hans and Fleischmann happens. He quits because he says that he quits the American Physical Society, which is like the #1 physics institution of, accredited PhD people or what have you. He quits being on it because they won't publish his papers. So you realize there's this gatekeeping that happens where if you don't have an accepted idea, you're not in the crew. You're not even allowed to publish your paper. You're not even allowed. And if you think people are really peer reviewing papers, there's basically no substantial peer review that occurs. I don't know who people think is doing that. I think they just think the idea is that if you publish it in your paper, somebody must have read it. Somebody must have determined the legitimacy. Who did? Who's the person who's going to determine the legitimacy of cold fusion or not, or the idea of negative energy or not? Unless you have the video that I showed you earlier today, well, how is anyone going to ever believe you if it's just a conceptual theory? And this is the part where science has moved away from we see something, now we need to explain it, from a point where now if I see something I don't think is possible, I'm just going to say it's fake. It's been debunked. That's the favorite thing to say. It's been debunked, right? Now it's been discredited. So, and that's all we have to do. And if you have a view like that, you're never going to advance as a society. Never. Because
Well, I
you've
think
locked yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
you're in leap years ahead of these people. That's why they're afraid of you, because you're coming out of left field. Kind of like one of
Well,
those
that's
orbs.
what
You're
happens
coming
with
out.
physics, though, in science, is it rarely. So everybody's always been wrong, but science doesn't happen incrementally. That's the academic fantasy, is they think we're just going to get a little bit better every time. And they love that, because that's why they now come up with like dark energy and dark matter, because they don't want to look back. They don't want to go, yeah, we messed up with the ether. They want to, no, we're just going to have a new way to explain it. There's going to be a new way. Quantum gravity. Okay, it must be at the quantum level. You're like, yes, it's at the quantum level. It's in the 0-point energy level, quantum level. Like, and they always come with these new terms for it or what have you. But they just redefine things. But really what happens is that there's shifts, there's leaps in science. And we're talking about the biggest leap that humanity has ever experienced, bigger than going from nothing to fire. Going from where we're at right now, combustion engines, and using things as fuel as opposed to just manifesting energy, we are going to break the Kardashev scale. We're going to have to come up with a new scale. Kardashev scale literally becomes obsolete because overnight you've now jumped up several levels. Like, the amount of energy the sun produces is inconsequential now. We can produce as much as we ever need. We can just pull it directly from the vacuum. The bigger question is, like, what are the costs with doing this? Like, is this going to be safe? Like, we're just pulling energy out here. Are we going to make a black hole? And that's what my ultimate fear has been. Like, I've actually been conflicted almost every single day. I've come to this rationalization, which is that you take infinite energy, you take amplification of energy, and the conclusion is obvious. Say goodbye to nuclear weapons. Those are just little child's toys, little firecrackers. Like, now we're talking about, can I actually produce like a coherent black hole that will just get bigger and bigger and bigger and pretty much suck away the entire planet in a fraction of a second? Probably. I don't see any reason why not, frankly. In fact, we might be able to make, why stop there? We might be able to make a big bang. We might be able to like actually produce a real big bang. Like, this is the funny part. Maybe the big bang didn't happen, but maybe we can actually produce one. Like, that's
It's hilarious.
it's funny,
Well,
but it's scary because
it's scary. It's a potential,
I don't
but
trust people. I don't trust people at all. I'm like fairly sure this is how we're gonna go out. And then when you start to realize, you're like, should I even be disclosing this? Like, it's not even a matter of like national security. It's just like, I don't want to be even partially responsible for the end of the universe or end of the world or whatever is going to happen, right? But I do think that's the answer. And I think there's another line to the UFO thing on this as well, which is that there's two ways to look at it. One is maybe the reason why the Fermi paradox exists, why we don't see civilizations everywhere, even though life, I think, must be abundant, is because any civilization that discovers this soon after they wipe themselves out, they might make a black hole. In fact, we actually don't know how many of the black holes out there form right now. So just to scare you a little bit, they might be civilizations that wiped themselves out, that created black holes and destroyed themselves. Now that's the downside. The good side is this. I think that the moment we take the LIGO, the laser interferometer device, we check. This is the thing that first publicly found gravity waves in 2015. Like, we had understood gravity waves many decades before this, but publicly we first detected that first one. This device only detects low frequency gravitational waves. People don't really know this. So it's looking for like neutron stars colliding into black holes, and then we see the ripples of gravity. We can measure it, and they did. If we were to ramp that up and turn that into a high frequency gravitational wave device, that's laboratory produced gravity waves. I'm pretty sure the moment we do that, the universe is going to light up like a Christmas tree. We're going to find life everywhere. Civilizations we're going to see out there right away. We're going to see them warping around throughout outer space, either bending space-time, and we're going to be able to measure the bend in space-time. That's what we should be looking for. And they're not using electromagnetic signals. They're using Puthoff's patent, and they are transmitting a beam through the medium, which once you're in the medium, The speed of light might just be infinite. So it's going to have literal instant transmission between any 2 points. So once you look at the world like that, say, wow, that's a completely different world than we understand here today. And I want to live in that world, hopefully, one day.
I think you will, actually, and maybe you'll have a hand in safely traversing that next step. So, or at least keeping it in check. And I don't think you're alone in that. Insofar as, we've had a lot of things across the time that we've had a lot of opportunity to destroy ourselves, and we did, I think, in Atlantis once. But maybe we get an opportunity to do it again, and maybe it's just a parallel experiment, and maybe it's not even in the past. I don't know, but we're coming into that whole vista of dimensional field, space-time continuum through a dimensional field, similar. Like you're saying that, I don't even know all the terminology. I just comprehend what you're saying when you say it. But that beam that goes out, maybe that beam is, in fact, piercing dimensional fields in different vibratory frequencies and having different experiences as it goes through to whatever endpoint. Is there an endpoint? I don't know. Is there an edge of the galaxy? I don't know. There's multiple galaxies, so how does this go? And how does that merge together if you follow what you just said?
But the answer is plasma in all those cases. And I think absolutely it's interacting. People use the term dimensional kind of loosey-goosey, but
I
end
mean
of the
it
day,
literally, like oscillating frequency, higher frequency,
no, you're
more
100% right. Because a lot of it
fractal
comes down,
dispersion.
again, if you look at scalar physics, what are you really trying to do? In scalar physics, you're just trying to like cancel out the waves. If you cancel out the waves, there's nothing there anymore. So if you can beam something, and all energy is, or all matter is trapped energy, potentially in a resonance. So yeah, for sure, you can interact with that. And if you are, interacting with the medium with that beam, yes, you're absolutely interacting with the beam, with the medium in that beam. So you understood it absolutely correctly from that perspective. And then,
How
how do you interact with that medium and what do you do with that? That's the big question.
it's a
Can you use,
responsibility to that is what you're saying.
yeah,
Once you start doing these things and putting them out there and it travels, we go back to that possibility of the witness again. But like you said, also, maybe it's right there. Maybe it's side by side and it's not even
Mm.
um, far away. You know what I mean? Maybe even that galaxy isn't far away. We are measuring it this way, but maybe it's this way. Maybe it's part of that toroidal field
oh yeah.
coming back in, right?
Yeah, so the dimensional part though too is that, yeah, I mean, we just use dimensions to explain what we perceive. So we say there's 3 spatial dimensions because I can go this way, that way, or up and down, right? 3 dimensions. End of the day, we're just using those dimensions to describe what we see. Time is another dimension because we're seeing time move forward. It's this
Right.
abstract concept that we can't really pin down. We just use it to explain our reality. The 5th dimension would be, to me, the energy at this 0-point field that we don't see it around us. We know it's there though. We feel it moving around because it gives the resistance that we would feel even if there was no air here. It's giving us that inertia, gives us mass, everything. So we know there's something there. So we use that dimension to explain it. So to me, when people talk about dimensional stuff, they say extra dimensional or whatever. What they should be talking about is like cause and effect. Like, what do you think is happening? Like, are you saying that a being is coming from one location of the universe to another? Because I would say that yes, it could do that. And you could call it an intradimensional being because it's traveling through the medium to instantly traverse here. But at the end of the day, it's all coming from the same place, right? It's all coming from this energy that we're feeling out there. Could multiverses be real? Like I'm the kind of guy at the moment. I mean, I'm talking about teleporting airplanes. So, everything is on the table. There's pretty much nothing that I'm not going to at least have a somewhat open mind about. Because once you realize something like this is possible, truly, like, where are the limits? I mean, to me, those limits are when you start talking about time travel and whether or not you can go back in time, things like that. I think we can understand that, but it's hard to wrap your brain around. Like, can there be multiple universes and those types of theories? I wouldn't know for sure unless we, have some experiments and have some evidence for it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's so vast and it's so much fun. Thank you for taking time and walking through this. Could you
Mhm.
do one more explanation for me before we
Sure.
part? Would you please describe your definition of plasma?
Yeah, so plasma is technically considered the fourth state of matter. So the other three states would just be gas, liquid, and solid. So I always was kind of confused with plasma. The sun is considered to be plasma. Um, so all anything really is atoms that are in a certain state with one another, certain energetic state. So the more energy you add, you're going to go from a solid to a liquid and then to a gaseous state. Then plasma is going to be a completely separate state. So for me, plasma is like almost as big as water is. You know how like water is like basically the fuel source for everything? Well, plasma might be the original state for everything that's really out there. And then in plasma,
Why do you say that?
because of like the double helix structure that we saw out there and the natural asymmetries that plasma has. End of the day, a lot of almost everything in our universe is about symmetry. Even if you're looking at that ocean of energy, you could say there's a symmetry there. You're looking at a mirror reflection, within the lake of the water. Just like if I were to look down, I'm not seeing myself underwater. I'm seeing the reflection of myself. And even energy, like it turns out that when we're making energy, a capacitor, we're just creating an asymmetry of more charge on one side than the other as well. And that this is able now connected to a circuit, now power my lights that are up there. Um, so plasma has natural asymmetries in it, self-organizing capabilities. So at some point, those toroidal structures that break out, they somehow they get back to the original point again, right? There's some type of self-reorganization that happens to it where they get this stable structure and now there's an equilibrium happening there and what have you. So to me, it seems like plasma is really that's the basis. I don't know anything else that has those types of properties to it. And that can give answers to why life even exists to begin with. Is like maybe we started out as plasma and then we basically collected dust particles, which is what we saw happening in that video. And the dust particles now naturally, based on the electrostatic charges, form like crabs or
Right.
other shapes like that. And to me, when I look at that, I go, holy shit, is like, did life come from plasma? And if so, like, what does that mean for like, do we have to be carbon based or can we be silicon based? Like, is it just a matter of what elements you were around when the plasma was forming? Um, I don't know. I think it's huge personally. I think
That's
plasma, and there's also this idea of Bose-Einstein condensate, which is not very well defined. Uh, which is this some elements form this macroscopic quantum superfluidity to them. And we have, and I don't know if it's all Bose-Einstein constants. I think so. They have this superconductive properties with them as well. So it's like this magical substance that begins to form that seems to defy our laws or understandings of physics, or at least not defy them, but bend the ruler quite a bit. So those are the two things, and I think the plasmas and the Bose-Einstein condensates are closely related to one another in terms of achieving these states of atoms that are self-organizing and begin to remind us of life itself.
I think that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for
Mhm.
that. That helps a lot. I've learned something really fascinating from you. Um, I never thought of anything that was purposeful or with a homogenistic type effect as asymmetrical. I always thought of it as imbalance. And you really spun my head. Like, I'm like, well, how does that work then? How does that perfect asymmetry work in an organized fashion that then turns again into symmetry? I don't quite understand that yet, but I'll work on it.
And honestly, that's a very intuitive. Oh, sorry, you're over here. That was a very intuitive thought right there. And what I would say is look up Elia Prigogine. Salvatore Pais mentioned him. Prigogine said that if you create an asymmetry, if you push things far from equilibrium, which means you're creating this asymmetry away from equilibrium, if you go too far,
Yeah.
all of a sudden there's a reorganization that happens. And then what is that? What is that reorganization? That's reverse entropy. negative entropy. So you go from disorder back to order again. Eli Prigogine showed that in chemistry that this is a real effect, real phenomenon that can occur. And that's why Salvatore Pais name dropped Eli Prigogine, because he understands that when you look at those videos, you're seeing negative energy, negative entropy. And so something can both have an asymmetry, but you can go too far, and then you can have a situation where the universe tries to reorganize itself. And I think that we're seeing some application of that in these self-organizing plasmas. That's why there is, in my opinion, definitely a natural phenomenon or natural element to this phenomenon. And we should basically just be using nature and not working against nature. Like, we do the best when we do that. Hydroelectric dams, solar power, wind power, like, we're thinking the right way, like, use nature. We're just missing the biggest piece, which is like the fundamental, where is energy coming from?
You mean the
And
part
so,
where you don't kill the whales because you're doing windmills and things like that, and you're not affecting all the plant life because you're rediverting things in great power. But you're saying, ancient civilizations, from what I've heard, could actually organize things, perhaps as plasma, and create things, and then create light balls, like they were saying. Ancient civilizations can have a lamp. Well, how do you fuel that lamp? Well, it's just light. It's organized. Well, how did you organize it? We thought it into existence. Well, how do you do that? Well, people don't know anymore, but we're probably lending back to all these things because we're going back to maybe what has always been there, and that's what you're discovering and pulling back forward in time. And you are doing that. You, not everybody, but you're doing that. So hats off to you, and don't stop, please. We we wish you safety and health and wellness and a voice and a continued voice, and that you're taking these things and you're putting it in their face, but there's no better time than right now. So own
thank
that
you.
now.
Yeah, and we need
Appreciate it.
more 0 point energy influencers out there and people spreading the word. So thank you for having me on and talking about this, because yeah, we just need more people spreading the word. There's no other way to get it out, is that we need people talking about it, making conversations happen with the people that are uncomfortable with it. And then the faster we do that, I think the faster we will get to Star Trek world, or Fallout world. But I'm hoping on Star Trek world, personally.
I'm going to hold out for your positive experiments and leading to something that will actually help everyone, because that, I think, is where your heart is, to help everybody with the free energy. So Ashton Forbes, and you can find him at Just X Ashton. I think that's great. That's pretty brilliant. I love that one. So your sense of humor and all is great. Your ways of sharing concepts, anybody can follow, and I really, really appreciate that. So you guys have to tune in and check out his lives. They're fascinating. They're really fun, and you will take something away from it each time. And even though if it seems like it's over your head, it's going to seep into you. I know that, and he has a gift for teaching. So I just want to say thank you, Ashton. I hope to have you back, and love to hear your interview with your favorite guy, and we'll be checking back in then. Okay, and
Thank you very
happy
much.
belated birthday. So, alrighty, thank you so much, everybody. You've been listening to Making Life Brighter, and thanks for being patient. We covered a lot of ground here, but as you know, I like to go there, and we are definitely not stopping. We're going to bend that quantum all the way until we get to the total now space and to the center of the universe. So here we are. Go jolly, everybody. Have a great night, and we will talk again soon.